The mountain wind whispered secrets as 7-year-old Eli Turner stood before the abandoned cabin. Only months had passed since that terrible night when his father disappeared and his childhood changed forever. Now he had returned, drawn by memories that haunted his dreams. The cabin stood silent, half reclaimed by nature, its weathered logs holding stories untold. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon light as his small boots echoed on familiar floorboards. His eyes traced the worn staircase where he once played, stopping at an odd, hollow sound beneath his feet. What he discovered under those stairs would unravel everything he knew about his family. Could his father still be alive somewhere in these mountains? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains outside the cabin window. 7-year-old Eli Turner pressed his small palm against the frosted glass, his breath creating ghosts that appeared and vanished with each exhale. Behind him, the fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. "Don't smudge the glass, son," his father said, not unkindly. James Turner sat in his rocking chair, a block of pine wood in one hand, his whittling knife in the other. Shavings curled at his feet like pale wood ribbons. Eli pulled his hand away, leaving a perfect print that slowly refrosted around the edges. "The snow's getting deeper, Pa." "That it is." James set down his carving, a half-formed wolf, and joined Eli at the window. His large, calloused hand rested on the boy's shoulder. "Might be the biggest storm we've seen in years." From the kitchen came the sound of humming. Eli's mother, Sarah, moved between counter and stove, her honey-colored hair tied back with a faded blue ribbon. The smell of venison stew filled the cabin, rich and comforting. "Will the animals be scared?" Eli asked. James chuckled. "They've seen worse, but I'll check on them after supper." The wind howled suddenly, a mournful sound that made Eli shiver despite the cabin's warmth. His father's grip tightened slightly on his shoulder. "Mountains talking tonight," James said softly. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper's ready." Her eyes drifted to the window. "James, I don't like the look of this storm. It's just snow, Sarah, but it wasn't just snow and they all knew it. 3 days of unrelenting precipitation had left the mountainside sodden beneath its white blanket. Twice already James had mentioned his concerns about the slope above their property. At the table, Eli's spoon clinked against his bowl as his parents exchanged glances over his head. The wooden clock on the mantel, carved by Grandpa Turner years before Eli was born, ticked heavily in the silence between conversation. "I found Mama Bear's old music box today," Eli said suddenly, reaching into his pocket and placing a small wooden box on the table. Sarah's expression softened. "Where on earth did you find that?" "Under my bed." It was all dusty. Eli opened the lid, and a tinny melody filled the cabin. A tiny carved bear inside spun slowly. James smiled. "Your mother played that for you every night when you were just a baby." "It always put him right to sleep," Sarah added, her eyes growing distant with the memory. The music wound down, the bear slowing until it stopped mid-turn. Outside, the wind grew louder. After supper, Eli helped his mother clear the table while James pulled on his heavy coat and boots. Sarah handed him his worn leather gloves, her face tight with worry. "Don't be long," she said. James nodded. "Just going to check the livestock, make sure the barn door is secure." He tousled Eli's hair. "You mind your mother, son? Can I come?" Eli asked, already reaching for his coat. "Not tonight," James replied firmly. "Too cold and too dark. I need you here with your mother." Disappointment flooded Eli's face, but he nodded solemnly. His father had been teaching him about responsibility, about being the man of the house when he wasn't around. "I'll be back before you know it," James promised. Adjusting his hat, the door opened, admitting a swirl of snowflakes and bitter cold. James stepped out, pulling it firmly shut behind him. Sarah moved to the window, watching her husband's lantern light grow smaller as he made his way toward the barn. "Let's get you ready for bed," she said finally, turning away. Eli retrieved his father's whittling from the chair, the half-finished wolf. Its eyes weren't carved yet, but it seemed to watch him all the same. He placed it carefully on the mantel beside the clock. In his small bedroom under the eaves, Eli changed into his flannel nightclothes while his mother turned down his quilt. Through the small window he could just make out the faint glow of his father's lantern in the barn. "Story tonight?" he asked hopefully. Sarah sat on the edge of his bed. "One short one?" She began a familiar tale about a clever fox who outsmarts a mountain lion. Eli had heard it countless times, but never tired of his mother's telling. Halfway through, a deep rumble interrupted her words. The cabin trembled slightly. Sarah stopped mid-sentence, her head turning toward the window. The rumble came again, louder this time. Eli's music box vibrated across his bedside table. "Ma?" Eli whispered. Sarah was already on her feet. "Stay here," she ordered, hurrying from the room. Eli disobeyed immediately, padding after her in his sock feet. In the main room, his mother stood at the window, her hand pressed against her mouth. The rumble had become a roar. "James," she whispered. The roar grew louder. Through the window, Eli watched in horror as the mountainside seemed to move. Trees tilted like sailors on a lurching ship. Snow and earth merged into a churning mass, barreling down toward the valley. "James!" Sarah screamed, her voice lost beneath the mountain's rage. The lantern light by the barn flickered, then disappeared. Eli clutched the doorframe, his small body trembling. "Pa?" His mother spun, suddenly remembering his presence. Her face transformed, fear masked by determined calm. "Eli, get your boots and coat now." He didn't move. "But Pa, now Eli." Her voice cracked like a whip. She rushed to a cabinet, yanking open drawers, gathering items into a canvas bag. Eli stumbled to the hook where his winter clothes hung. As he pulled on his coat, his hand brushed against something hard in the pocket, his father's compass. James had let him keep it yesterday after teaching him how to find north. Eli clutched it tightly, its weight solid and reassuring in his palm. The cabin groaned around them. A picture fell from the wall, glass shattering on the floor. Outside, the sound of splitting wood and tumbling rocks grew closer. Sarah grabbed Eli's shoulder, shoving his hat onto his head. "We need to go out the back toward the ridge. It's safer there." Her eyes darted to the front door. "Your father will meet us." But her voice held a hollow note that even a 7-year-old could recognize. "He won't know where we are." Eli protested. Sarah knelt before him, gripping both his shoulders. Her eyes blazed with a fierce, desperate light. "Your father knows these mountains better than anyone. He'll find us." She pressed her forehead against his. "I promise, another crash, closer now." Dust rained from the ceiling beams. Sarah stood, grabbing the canvas bag and Eli's hand. She pulled him toward the back door, snatching a photograph from the mantel as they passed. "What about Mama Bear?" Eli cried, remembering the music box on his bedside table. "We'll come back for it," Sarah lied, pushing him through the door into the howling night. The cold hit like a physical blow. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, the wind stealing their breath. Sarah pulled Eli close, shielding him with her body as they staggered away from the cabin. Behind them came an almighty crack. Eli turned to see half the mountainside sliding past their cabin, taking the barn in its path. The structure crumpled like paper, swallowed by the churning mass of snow, rock, and timber. "Pee!" he screamed, trying to pull away from his mother. Sarah's grip tightened painfully. "We can't help him by dying ourselves." She dragged him forward, toward the ridge that rose behind their property. They stumbled through knee-deep snow, the compass clutched in Eli's frozen fingers. Each step was a battle against the wind and his own desperate desire to turn back. Tears froze on his cheeks. From the ridge they watched in helpless horror. The landslide had carved a path of destruction down the mountainside. Their cabin stood, miraculously still intact on its small plateau, but everything below it was gone. The barn, the chicken coop, the shed where James stored his tools, all vanished beneath a sea of debris. "He got out," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Eli. "He saw it coming and got out." Eli said nothing, his eyes fixed on the destruction below. In his hand, the compass needle spun wildly, as if it too had lost its bearings in the chaos. Sarah pulled him away. "We need to reach town before we freeze." "But Pa might be looking for us," Eli protested. For a moment, Sarah's composure cracked. Her face contorted with grief and indecision. Then she straightened, wrapping her arm more firmly around her son. "If he's alive, he'll head to town too," she said. "It's where everyone goes in an emergency." They began the long trek down the far side of the ridge, away from their home, away from James. The compass in Eli's pocket knocked against his leg with each step, a steady reminder of his father's absence. The night stretched endlessly before them, a black canvas painted with swirling white. Eli's legs grew numb, moving mechanically through the deepening snow. His mother's arm around his shoulders was the only warmth in the world. "Tell me about the fox again," he whispered, his voice small against the wind. Sarah's step faltered. Then she began to speak, her words creating a bubble of normalcy in their shattered world. The story of the clever fox who survived against impossible odds. By dawn, they reached the outskirts of Pinecrest. The storm had abated, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Eli's grandfather met them at the door of his small house, his weathered face crumpling at the sight of them, one instead of two. As the adults spoke in hushed, urgent tones, Eli slipped away to the window. He pulled the compass from his pocket, watching as the needle finally settled, pointing unerringly back the way they had come. Back toward the mountain, back toward home, back toward his father. 3 months passed like molasses in winter. Grandfather Turner's house in Pinecrest felt too small, too enclosed after the open expanse of the mountain. The ceilings were low, the rooms cluttered with a lifetime of possessions. It smelled of pipe tobacco and old books instead of pine and wood smoke. Eli sat on the edge of his bed, not his real bed, but the narrow cot in what had once been his father's childhood room. Above the dresser hung a faded photograph of a young James Turner, maybe 12 years old, standing proudly beside his first deer hunt. Eli stared at it each morning, searching his father's boyish face for clues. From his pocket he withdrew a smooth stone, river-polished quartz, with a vein of gold running through it. His father had given it to him on his last birthday, calling it a wishing stone. Some folks say, if you hold a special stone when you make a wish, the mountain hears you, James had told him. This one's been listening to Turner wishes for generations. Eli closed his fingers around it now, squeezing until the edges pressed painfully into his palm. Every night since the landslide, he'd wished the same wish. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked beneath his mother's restless pacing. Sarah had taken work at the general store, returning each evening with tired eyes and forced smiles. She spoke less these days. Sometimes Eli would find her staring out windows, toward the mountains that dominated the horizon. "Your pa's coming home for supper," Grandfather called up the stairs. Eli tucked the stone back into his pocket. It wasn't the first time Grandfather had confused him with James. The old man's mind wandered more often lately, slipping between decades like someone thumbing through a worn book. In the kitchen, Sarah ladled stew into bowls. "Is school tomorrow?" she reminded Eli as he slid into his chair. He nodded, poking at the food without interest. School in Pinecrest meant 26 curious faces, endless whispers, and pitying glances from Mrs. Harper. "Did they find anything today?" he asked, the same question he'd asked every evening for 3 months. Sarah's spoon paused midway to her lips. "Not today, honey." "Sheriff Bryce says they're calling off the search after this week," Grandfather muttered. "Says the spring melt will make it too dangerous." "Dad," Sarah warned, glancing at Eli, but he'd already heard. 3 months of eavesdropping had made him an expert at gathering scraps of adult conversation. He knew the search parties had found no trace of his father. He knew some people in town whispered that no one could have survived that night. He knew others said James Turner had been a fool to build so high on the mountain in the first place. After dinner, Eli escaped to the front porch. The April evening was mild, stars appearing one by one above the silhouetted peaks. He pulled out his wishing stone, running his thumb along the gold vein. The screen door creaked. Sarah joined him, wrapping a quilt around his shoulders. "Sheriff Bryce said something interesting today," she said carefully. "He flew over our old place in Bill Harmon's plane. Said the cabin's still standing. Can you believe that?" Eli's heart leapt. "Can we go see?" "The road's gone, honey. The landslide took it out completely. We could hike. Pa showed me how to follow deer trails." Sarah's arm tightened around him. "It's not safe. That whole mountainside is unstable. But what if Pa went back there? What if he's waiting for us?" The hope in his voice hung in the night air. Sarah kissed the top of his head, her cheek damp against his hair. "I know it's hard to understand," she whispered. "But sometimes people we love don't come back, no matter how much we wish they would." Later, lying in bed, Eli listened to the muffled sounds of his mother crying in the next room. He clutched his wishing stone so tightly, his fingers ached. At school the next day, Eli sat alone during lunch, picking at his sandwich. The other children had mostly stopped staring, but they rarely included him in their games. He was different, the mountain boy whose father had vanished. "Is it true your house got buried in an avalanche?" Tommy Pearson asked, dropping onto the bench across from him. "It was a landslide," Eli corrected. "And our house is still there." Tommy's eyes widened. "For real?" "My dad said nothing could have survived. The cabin's special," Eli said. "Pa built it to last. So why don't you go back?" It was the same question Eli asked himself every day. If the cabin was still there, why couldn't they return? What if his father had made it back somehow, waiting for them to come home? That night, as his mother and grandfather slept, Eli pulled his backpack from under the bed. Inside, he'd packed a flashlight, his compass, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 apples. On a piece of paper, he carefully drew a map from town to their mountain home, marking the deer trails his father had taught him to recognize. He placed his wishing stone on the dresser where it would be found. Beneath it, he left a note. "Gone to find Pa, don't worry." In the pale moonlight, he traced the gold vein one last time. Then he turned away, leaving the stone behind, no longer needed for wishing, but for finding instead. Dawn painted the eastern sky when Eli slipped out his bedroom window. The town still slept, only chimney smoke signaling life behind darkened windows. He clutched his hand-drawn map tightly, its creases already worn from constant folding and unfolding. The wilderness began where Pinecrest ended, abruptly, like turning a page. Eli followed the creek that ran behind grandfather's house, knowing it flowed down from higher ground. The burbling water masked his footsteps as he crossed from civilization into wild country. His father's lessons echoed in his memory. Always travel upstream if you're lost. Water leads to people, but the source leads to quiet places. James Turner had been a man of few words, but those he spoke carried weight. As sunlight strengthened, Eli spotted the 3-pronged pine his map marked as the first landmark. Here the creek forked, and he veered right, following the smaller tributary that led toward their mountain. By mid-morning, his legs ached. The backpack straps dug into his shoulders, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. He stopped beside a fallen log, extracting one of the apples from his pack. As he ate, something glinted in the decaying wood, a small pocket knife, its blade rusted but the carved wooden handle intact. Eli recognized it instantly. Billy Farnsworth's knife, lost during a hiking trip last summer. Billy had been in tears, and James Turner had spent hours helping the boy retrace his steps. They never found it. Eli wiped the blade on his pants and slipped it into his pocket. A good sign, he decided, a reminder that lost things could sometimes be found. The terrain grew steeper as noon approached. Twice he had to backtrack when his path disappeared into thickets too dense to navigate. His map, created from memory and childish understanding of distance, proved increasingly unreliable. Panic fluttered in his chest when he reached a boulder field he didn't recognize. He climbed the largest rock, scanning the landscape. Nothing looked familiar. Then he spotted it, a solitary hawk circling lazily above a distant ridge. His father had taught him that certain birds nested in the same places year after year. That particular ridge had housed a hawk's nest for as long as Eli could remember. His father called it Hawk's Watch. "When you see the hawk, you're almost home," he whispered, orienting himself. The sun was low when Eli finally crested the ridge overlooking their property. He dropped to his knees, breath catching in his throat. Below, the landscape had been transformed. The landslide had carved a raw, ugly scar down the mountainside. Trees lay flattened like matchsticks. The barn and outbuildings had vanished without trace, buried beneath tons of rock and soil. But there, on its small natural plateau, stood the cabin. It seemed smaller somehow, hunched against the mountain as if seeking protection. Ivy had begun to claim the western wall, and the chimney listed slightly. But it stood, home. Eli scrambled down the slope, slipping on loose rocks, grabbing at saplings to slow his descent. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by urgent purpose. The front yard was a tangle of debris, uprooted shrubs, splintered wood, and mud hardened to clay. The steps creaked ominously beneath his weight. The door, swollen with moisture, required all his strength to push open. Stale air greeted him, thick with dust and abandonment. Slanting sunlight penetrated the unwashed windows, illuminating dancing motes and cobwebs. "Pa," he called, his voice small in the emptiness. Nothing had been touched since that night. Dishes still sat on the table, crusted with 3-month-old remnants of their last dinner. His father's whittling knife lay beside the half-carved wolf. Sarah's sewing basket remained open, a needle stuck in unfinished work. Eli moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects with reverent fingers. In his bedroom, he found Mama Bear's music box exactly where he'd left it. He opened it, but the mechanism had rusted. The bear stood frozen, the melody silenced. No sign indicated his father had returned. No evidence suggested anyone had visited since the landslide. Disappointment settled over him like a heavy blanket. What had he expected? His father waiting patiently by the fire. A note explaining his absence. Tired beyond words, Eli sank onto the bottom stair. The wood groaned beneath him, one board shifting oddly under his weight. He shifted, and the loose board moved again. Curious, he stood and pressed down with his foot. The board made a hollow sound, different from the others. Kneeling, he examined the step more closely. The board wasn't just loose. It had been deliberately cut and fitted back into place. Someone had modified the staircase. Eli's heart thundered in his chest. He dug his fingers into the seam and pulled. The board came away easily, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was a tin box, roughly the size of his mother's recipe holder. It was wrapped in oilcloth, protecting it from moisture. Eli's hands trembled as he lifted it out. The cloth fell away, exposing a metal surface etched with his father's initials. J.T. Eli ran his fingers over the letters, tears blurring his vision. His father had hidden this here beneath the stairs. But why and when? As sunset painted the cabin walls crimson, Eli Turner sat on the floor of his childhood home and opened the mysterious box. Unaware that this moment would change everything he thought he knew about his family, his father, and the mountain that had claimed him. The tin box's hinges protested with a metallic whine. Inside, Eli found several folded papers, a child's blue marble, and a tarnished silver chain with a small key. His hands trembled as he carefully lifted out the topmost paper, yellowed at the edges and covered in his father's distinctive handwriting. Eli moved to the window for better light, unfolding the paper with cautious fingers. A pressed wildflower fell into his palm, a mountain bluebell, his mother's favorite. He placed it gently on the windowsill and began to read. To whoever finds this, hopefully my son Eli when he's old enough. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I pray it's because I've passed naturally after a long life, but I fear that won't be the case. There are men in town who don't want certain truths known, and they've made their intentions clear. It started 3 months ago, when I was tracking a lost calf. I followed its trail to the North Ridge, where I found something strange, fresh boot prints and tool marks on rocks that should have been untouched for decades. The old Blackwood mine was supposed to be sealed after the accident in '92, but someone had cleared a new entrance. I should have minded my business, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed the tunnel and discovered they'd been working the deep shaft again, extracting something blue that glows in the dark. Not coal or any mineral I recognize. When they caught me watching, I played dumb. But Sheriff Bryce and Mayor Hammond made a midnight visit the next week. Said they were offering me a job with the operation. When I declined, the threats began. Subtle at first, then not so subtle. I've been documenting everything. The other papers in this box are my records. Names, dates, locations. If anything happens to me, take these to Marshall Gardner in Helena. Don't trust local law, Eli. If you're reading this while still a boy, stop now and take this box to your mother. The rest isn't for a child's eyes, but if you're grown, you should know. There's an entrance to the mine beneath our cabin. I discovered it when reinforcing the foundation. I sealed it with a steel door under the stairs, hidden behind the stone wall of the root cellar. The key on this chain opens it. Don't open that door. Whatever they're extracting isn't natural. I've heard sounds from below, scratching, whispering. Things no mind should contain. I love you, son. I've tried to protect our family, but I fear I've put you in danger instead. Forgive me. Dad, Eli read the letter 3 times, his young mind struggling to comprehend all its implications. Parts made little sense. What was a mineral exactly? Why would Sheriff Bryce threaten his father? Who was Marshall Gardner? But the central message was clear. His father had found something beneath their mountain, something dangerous, that powerful men wanted to keep secret, and his father had feared for his life. Eli carefully refolded the letter, his gaze drawn to the second document in the box. But twilight had deepened while he read, and now the cabin interior lay in shadow. He needed light. In the kitchen he found a candle stub in his mother's emergency drawer. The matches beside it were damp, but after several attempts he managed to coax a flame. The candlelight cast jumping shadows as he returned to his father's documents. The second paper contained a crude map. Eli recognized the outline of their mountain, with red X marks at several locations. One X was directly beneath their cabin, labeled Main Shaft. A sound stopped him, a faint creaking from outside. Eli froze, listening intently. Had his mother realized he was missing and followed him? Or was it just the old cabin settling? Then came another noise, undeniable this time. Footsteps on the front porch. Panic surged through him. Eli quickly gathered the papers and marble, stuffing them back into the tin box. The candle tipped in his haste, hot wax searing his finger. He bit back a cry of pain, shoving the box into his backpack. The footsteps stopped at the door. A long pause followed. Then the distinct sound of the handle turning. Eli dove beneath the table just as the door swung open. Through the table legs, he glimpsed mud-caked boots entering the cabin. Not his mother's. Not anyone he recognized. A flashlight beam swept the room, passing inches from his hiding place. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here," a deep voice said. "Check upstairs," replied another. "Hammond wants to be sure." Heavy footsteps moved toward the staircase, the same stairs with the hidden compartment now conspicuously empty, its concealing board lying discarded on the floor. Eli's hand closed around the blue marble from his father's box. The glass was cool against his palm, its surface etched with tiny stars, a celestial pattern he'd never noticed on any ordinary marble. He clutched it like a talisman as the boots climbed the creaking stairs above his head. In that moment, terror and revelation struck him simultaneously. His father's fears had been justified. The men had come. And now they might find Eli too. Eli curled deeper into the shadows beneath the table, hardly daring to breathe. The blue marble pulsed against his palm, or perhaps it was just his own heartbeat racing through his fingertips. "Nothing upstairs," called one of the men, his boots heavy on the descending stairs. "Check the cellar," the second voice commanded. "I'll look around out back." A beam of light swept across the floor again, inches from Eli's hiding place. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself invisible. "Wait," said the first voice, suddenly closer. "What's this?" Eli opened one eye. Through the table legs, he saw a large hand reaching for something on the floor, the loose stairboard. His stomach twisted with dread. "Someone's been here, recently." The man crouched, examining the exposed cavity. "The hiding place is empty." A long silence followed. Eli could hear his own blood rushing in his ears. "Hammond needs to know," the second man finally said. "Let's finish the sweep and report back." The basement door creaked open. Footsteps descended into darkness. Outside, the other man's flashlight beam played across the yard. Eli remained frozen, clutching the marble, waiting for his chance. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, both men returned to the main room. "Nothing in the cellar," reported one. "Yards clear, too. But someone definitely found Turner's stash. Kids, maybe. This place would be catnip to local teenagers." A derisive snort. "And what teenager hikes 5 miles up a mountain just to explore an abandoned cabin? We'll need to watch this place. If Turner left evidence, someone might come looking for more." Their footsteps retreated. The front door closed. Through a crack in the floorboards, Eli watched their flashlights bobbing away down the overgrown path. Only when silence had reigned for several minutes did he dare crawl from his hiding place. His legs wobbled as he stood. Night had fallen completely now, the cabin interior pitch black. Fumbling in his backpack, he located his own flashlight. The beam was weak. He'd forgotten to bring spare batteries, but it provided enough light to navigate. The hidden cavity beneath the stairs drew him back like a magnet. Kneeling, Eli shone his light inside. Had his father hidden anything else the men might have missed? His fingers probed the dusty space, finding nothing but splinters and cobwebs. He was about to give up when his knuckles rapped against the back wall, producing a hollow sound. Pressing harder, he felt the wood panel give slightly. A false back. Heart racing, Eli pushed against the panel. It resisted, then slid sideways with a soft scraping sound. Behind it lay a small leather pouch tied with twine. He carefully extracted it, untying the simple knot with trembling fingers. The pouch contained an old brass pocket watch. Engraved on its cover was an intricate design, a mountain with a star above it. The same celestial pattern as the blue marble. Eli clicked it open. The watch face had long stopped, its hands frozen at 3:17, but what caught his attention was the small photograph pressed inside the cover, a much younger James Turner, standing beside a dark-haired man Eli had never seen before. They wore matching pendants around their necks, both smiling at the camera. On the back of the photograph, faded pencil writing read, "James and Edward, guardians of the gate. May we keep better watch than those who came before." A sudden sound made Eli jump, a distinct knock from beneath the floorboards. Then another, not random settling noises, but deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. The sound traveled, moving from beneath the stairs toward the center of the room. Eli backed away, clutching the pocket watch. Silence fell again. Then, so faint he might have imagined it a voice. Eli, his name whispered from below. A child's voice, not an adult's. "Who's there?" Eli managed, his own voice barely audible. No response came, but the temperature in the cabin plummeted. His breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. The weak flashlight beam flickered, threatening to fail entirely. Another knock directly beneath his feet this time. Then scratching like fingernails on wood. Terrified, Eli retreated toward the front door. The brass watch felt impossibly heavy in his hand, its metal ice-cold against his skin. Yet something prevented him from dropping it, some instinct that this object mattered. The knocking intensified following his movement across the room. Whatever dwelled beneath the cabin knew exactly where he stood. At the door, Eli hesitated. His father's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't open that door." But had James Turner meant the mine entrance? Or was he warning against the cabin itself? Had the house become a trap? Outside, clouds parted, allowing moonlight to spill through the windows. The silver light illuminated something Eli hadn't noticed before, marks scratched into the floorboards. Fresh marks, forming letters GLP. The temperature dropped further. His flashlight died completely. In the sudden darkness, the knocking stopped, replaced by a sound far worse, soft sobbing. A child crying somewhere beneath the floor. "I'm still here," whispered the voice. The brass watch in Eli's hand began to tick, though its hands remained frozen at 3:17. Each tick synchronized perfectly with his heartbeat, as if the timepiece had somehow bonded to his own life rhythm. Clutching the watch to his chest, Eli made his decision. He would not flee into the night, not yet. Something or someone was trapped beneath his home. And despite his fear, one thought burned brighter than the rest. What if it was his father? Dawn arrived with merciful normalcy. Sunlight streamed through dirty windows, banishing the night's terrors. The floorboards, which had seemed alive with movement in darkness, now lay innocently still. The scratched message remained, however, "Help," carved into the wood with unmistakable purpose. Eli had spent the remainder of the night huddled in a corner, the pocket watch clutched tightly in his hand. It had ticked steadily until first light, then fallen silent once more. Now he tucked it carefully into his jeans pocket and approached the message on the floor. The letters were crude but deliberate, cut with something sharp. Not weathered or old, but fresh, the exposed wood still pale. Whoever or whatever had made them, they wanted Eli to see. His father's letter mentioned sounds from below, scratching, whispering, things no mind should contain. But it also referred to a hidden entrance beneath the stairs, behind the stone wall of the root cellar. Eli hadn't found any such cellar in his exploration. Then he remembered his father's final clue in the letter. "If you're reading this while still a boy, take this box to your mother, the tin box." There might be more information inside that he'd missed. Eli retrieved his backpack and emptied its contents on the table. The tin box tumbled out alongside his provisions. Inside, beneath the documents he'd already examined, lay a folded piece of paper he hadn't noticed before, a detailed floor plan of the cabin. There it was, the root cellar, accessed not through the basement as he'd assumed, but via a trap door beneath the kitchen rug. His father had penciled a note in the margin. "Cellar entrance concealed after 97 flood. Sarah doesn't know." Eli rushed to the kitchen, dragging aside the heavy braided rug. The floorboards beneath appeared identical to those throughout the cabin. But when he knocked, they returned a different sound, hollower, deeper. Pressing his fingertips along the seams, he found a slight indentation. He pushed, and a section of flooring pivoted on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow set of stone steps descending into darkness. The stale air that rose from below carried an unfamiliar mineral scent. Eli hesitated, remembering his father's explicit warning, "Don't open that door." But the door his father meant was deeper still, the steel door to the mine shaft. This was just the cellar, where perhaps more answers waited. His flashlight had died during the night, leaving him no way to explore the darkness below. He needed daylight and a better plan, and he needed to understand more of his father's secrets. The letter had mentioned the place where we watched the stars. Eli knew exactly where that was. The star-gazing rock, a flat granite outcropping on the eastern ridge where the tree line thinned. On clear nights, his father had taken him there to identify constellations and tell stories of ancient star sailors. Eli secured the cabin before leaving, carefully replacing the loose stairboard and dragging the kitchen rug back over the trap door. Whatever dwelled beneath the floorboards, he wasn't ready to confront it yet. The morning was bright and cool as he climbed the ridge path. Animals scurried in the underbrush, normal forest sounds that soothed his frayed nerves. By the time he reached the stargazing rock, sweat dampened his shirt despite the spring chill. The granite surface, warmed by morning sun, welcomed him like an old friend. He and his father had spent countless evenings here, lying back on the smooth stone, watching stars emerge. James Turner had known the name of every constellation, or invented names when he didn't. "That one there," he'd say, "that's the brave little fox. See his pointed ears and bushy tail." Eli closed his eyes, remembering. When he opened them again, something caught his attention, a small cairn of stacked stones at the edge of the outcropping that hadn't been there before. 3 flat rocks balanced with careful precision. His father had taught him that cairns were trail markers, messages left by those who passed before. This one seemed deliberately placed, recently built. Eli approached cautiously and crouched beside it. The stones were not randomly selected. Each bore subtle markings, lines and dots carved into the surface. The pattern matched the celestial design on the blue marble and pocket watch. Eli carefully lifted the top stone. Nothing beneath. He tried the second. Again nothing. But when he removed the third stone, it revealed a small hollow in the granite that nature couldn't have formed, a perfect cylindrical depression. Inside lay a wooden box made of polished cedar, no larger than his hand. Carved into its lid was a single word, Starfinder. With trembling fingers, Eli opened the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a brass instrument unlike anything he'd seen before, a complex arrangement of gears and movable rings centered around a crystal lens. It resembled a sextant from his schoolbooks, but with additional components his young mind couldn't identify. A folded note accompanied the device, his father's handwriting instantly recognizable. For Eli, the stars guide us in darkness. When night falls, hold the Starfinder to the sky. What you seek lies where the North Star meets the mountain's eye. But beware the blue light, it draws them upward. Pa Eli turned the strange instrument over in his hands. Sunlight caught the crystal lens, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across the rock surface. One of the brass rings moved when he touched it, clicking into position with mechanical precision. The craftsmanship was far beyond his father's whittling skills. This was something ancient, something precious. He slipped the Starfinder into his pocket alongside the watch. Night would come again, and with it perhaps answers. But one thing was certain. His father had left these breadcrumbs deliberately, knowing Eli might someday follow the trail. As he descended from the ridge, a prickling sensation crawled up his spine. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent. No bird calls, no rustling underbrush, just watching stillness. He was no longer alone on the mountain. Back at the cabin, Eli's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the previous day. He rummaged through the kitchen, finding a forgotten jar of blackberry preserves that had survived the months of abandonment. The sugar had crystallized, but it was edible, sweet against his tongue as he scooped it out with his fingers. While eating, he noticed something he'd overlooked, a loose floorboard beneath his father's reading chair. The worn armchair sat slightly askew, as if hastily repositioned. Eli pushed it aside, revealing a plank that didn't quite match the others. Using the edge of Billy Farnsworth's pocket knife, he pried up the board. Beneath lay a shallow cavity containing a leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth. The book was weathered, its spine cracked from frequent use. A red ribbon marked a page near the middle. Eli wiped sticky preserve from his fingers before carefully opening the journal to the marked page. His father's bold handwriting filled the margins around newspaper clippings meticulously pasted to the pages. The headline of one clipping read, "Third child vanishes from Pinecrest region." The article, dated 2 years prior, detailed the disappearance of 10-year-old Lucy Hammond, daughter of Mayor Robert Hammond. She had last been seen picking berries near the old Blackwood mine entrance. His father had circled the word "third" in red ink, and in the margin wrote, "Officially the 3rd, but actually the 7th. Others not reported." Eli's breath caught. 7 missing children? He flipped backward through the journal. More clippings appeared, dating back decades. All followed the same pattern. Children vanishing in the mountains, searches finding nothing, investigations eventually abandoned. His father had annotated each article, connecting details others might miss. Locations mapped, dates compared, witness statements analyzed. One name appeared repeatedly in the older clippings: Edward Blackwood, owner of the original mining operation. In a yellowing article from 1957, Blackwood announced the closure of the mine following a regrettable accident. James Turner had underlined the word "accident" and written, "No bodies ever recovered." Most disturbing was a list in his father's handwriting titled, "Cycle dates, 1957, 3 children, 1977, 5 children, 1997, 4 children, 2017. Children, Lucy H. confirmed, others suspected. Beneath this, James had written, 20-year pattern. Why? What happens in the 20th year? Eli's hands trembled as he turned to the most recent entries. His father's writing became more urgent, less methodical. April 15th, found the new shaft entrance. They've broken through to the deep chambers. Blue crystals everywhere. Took samples. April 17th. Hammond confronted me at the general store. Neighborly warning to stay away from the North Ridge. Mentioned Sarah and Eli by name. Threat obvious. April 23rd. Tested crystal sample. Unusual properties. Emits light without heat. Resonates to sound, especially children's voices. Edward's notes mention this. Need to find his complete research. April 28th. Discovered Blackwood Family Cemetery in Old Town records. Edward buried with personal effects, including research journals. Must investigate. May sue. Located unmarked entrance beneath our property. Connected to main shaft. Sealed it temporarily. Need stronger door. May 5. Voices from below getting louder. They know I'm here. Not mineral echoes as I first thought. Something else. Something alive. May 10. Sheriff and Hammond came tonight with offer. Join them or leave the mountain. Mentioned mining operation requires special laborers who can access narrow tunnels. Children. My God. May 12th. Sarah noticed nothing, thank heaven. Hiding evidence in usual places. If anything happens, the trail is laid for Eli when he's older. Pray it never comes to that. The final entry was dated May 15, 3 days before the landslide that took his father. Strange lights in the north shaft last night. Movement in the woods around our property. They're watching us. Time running out. We'll try one last reconnaissance tonight. If successful, taking family and evidence to Marshall tomorrow. If not, the entry ended there, the final words hanging like a precipice. Eli closed the journal, mind reeling. His father hadn't been lost in a random landslide. He'd been silenced because he'd discovered something terrible happening in the mountain. Something involving missing children and mysterious blue crystals. And Mayor Hammond, who'd lost his own daughter to whatever lurked below, was somehow involved. A distant mechanical rumble interrupted Eli's thoughts. He moved to the window, peering through grimy glass toward the North Ridge. Through a gap in the trees, he glimpsed movement. Vehicles on what had once been an abandoned logging road. Heavy equipment heading toward the old mine entrance. The operation his father had discovered was still active. And if the pattern in the journal was correct, this was the 20th year of a cycle that demanded children. Inside his pocket, the Starfinder suddenly warmed against his thigh, its metal heating without explanation. The pocket watch began ticking again, though he hadn't wound it. And deep beneath the cabin floor, the knocking started once more, urgent, desperate, beckoning him below. The knocking grew more insistent, a desperate rhythm that seemed to call directly to Eli. He stood frozen, the journal clutched to his chest, as dust sifted from between floorboards with each impact from below. Darkness would fall soon. The men he'd glimpsed heading toward the mine might return. He needed to act now. While daylight still filtered through the cabin windows, Eli returned to the kitchen, pulling aside the braided rug once more. The trap door waited, a dark mouth leading to the unknown. Without his flashlight, he would need another light source. In his father's tool drawer, he found an old oil lamp with a cracked glass chimney. A splash of kerosene remained in its base, enough for perhaps an hour of light. His hands trembled as he struck a match, adjusting the wick until a steady flame emerged. The lamp cast wavering shadows as Eli descended the narrow stone steps into the root cellar. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying that strange mineral scent he'd noticed earlier. At the bottom, he held the lamp high, illuminating a space far larger than he'd expected. Rough stone walls glistened with moisture. Wooden shelves lined one side, still holding dusty mason jars of his mother's preserves. But it was the far wall that captured Eli's attention. Solid stone, unlike the others, with a steel door set into its center. The mine entrance his father had mentioned. As Eli approached, his foot struck something on the ground, a small wooden puppet intricately carved. He bent to examine it, lamplight dancing across its delicate features. The figure was a girl of perhaps 10, with articulated arms and legs that moved on tiny joints. Her face bore a sorrowful expression, eyes downcast. A single tear carved into her wooden cheek. On her back, carved in miniature precision, was a name: Lucy. Lucy Hammond, the mayor's daughter who had disappeared 2 years ago. Eli nearly dropped the puppet in shock. This was no child's toy. This was something else, a memorial perhaps, or something darker. His father's skilled hands had carved this figure with unsettling detail, capturing a portrait of a lost child in wood. The knocking sound changed, becoming more localized, coming directly from behind the steel door. Then came the voice again, clearer this time. "Please, help us." Eli approached the door, the carved puppet clutched in one hand, lamp in the other. A heavy padlock secured the door, identical to the one on their toolshed, and he knew exactly where his father kept spare keys. Heart pounding, Eli raced back upstairs to the kitchen drawer where miscellaneous items accumulated: twine, spare buttons, extra keys. He rummaged frantically, finally locating a tarnished key that might fit. Back in the cellar, he tried the key in the padlock. It turned with stubborn resistance, but finally clicked open. The padlock fell away, clanging against the stone floor. Eli hesitated, his father's warning echoing in his mind: "Don't open that door." But the desperate knocking continued, and the child's voice called again: "Please, we can't hold on much longer. Not I." With trembling fingers, Eli grasped the iron handle and pulled. The heavy door swung outward with surprising ease, as if eager to reveal its secrets. Beyond lay not a rough mine shaft as he'd expected, but a perfectly round tunnel with smooth, polished walls. The stone glowed faintly blue, providing its own ghostly illumination. The oil lamp's flames sputtered in a sudden draft from the tunnel, nearly extinguishing. The knocking had stopped the moment the door opened. Now silence pressed against Eli's ears, broken only by the sound of his own rapid breathing. "Hello," he called, voice barely above a whisper. No response came from the tunnel. But the wooden puppet in his hand suddenly grew warm, its tiny articulated limbs twitching against his palm. Startled, Eli nearly dropped it. The puppet's head turned, a movement so slight he might have imagined it. But then its arm rose, wooden finger pointing into the tunnel's depths. A distant blue glow pulsed deeper within the passage, brightening and dimming like a heartbeat. With each pulse, the puppet's limbs twitched more insistently. Eli took one hesitant step forward, then another. The tunnel floor sloped gently downward, leading into the mountain's heart. The lamp's flame steadied as he moved deeper, casting long shadows that danced alongside him. After 20 paces, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. Here the blue glow intensified, emanating from veins of crystal embedded in the walls. The light pulsed in perfect synchronization with the ticking of the pocket watch in Eli's pocket. In the chamber's center stood a stone pedestal, its surface worn smooth by time. Carved into its side were familiar symbols, the celestial pattern from the marble and watch. Stars connected by flowing lines. Atop the pedestal sat a small wooden box, similar to the one that had contained the Starfinder, but larger. Its surface was blackened, as if charred by intense heat. As Eli approached, the wooden puppet grew warmer still. Its tiny face seemed to transform, the sorrowful expression shifting to one of urgent warning. The box lid opened of its own accord. Inside lay a key unlike any Eli had seen before. Twisted iron formed into an impossible shape, with teeth that branched and curled like living roots. It emitted its own blue glow, pulsing in rhythm with the crystals in the wall. A voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere: "The Guardian's key awakens." The cycle nears completion. The wooden puppet went suddenly rigid in Eli's hand, its warmth fading. A single drop of moisture, too red to be water, fell from its carved eye. In that moment, Eli knew with terrible certainty that he had gone too far. Some threshold had been crossed, some process set in motion, and somewhere in the tunnels below, something was now aware of his presence. The twisted iron key hovered an inch above the box, suspended by some invisible force. As Eli stared, transfixed, it rotated slowly, its blue glow pulsing with hypnotic rhythm. take it," whispered the voice. "Take what is yours by birthright." The wooden puppet suddenly jerked in his hand, its limbs contorting in warning. Eli hesitated, remembering his father's journal, the missing children, the 20-year cycle, the voices from below that James Turner had feared. Instead of reaching for the key, Eli backed away. The moment he moved, the chamber's atmosphere changed. The blue light intensified, crystals brightening until they hurt his eyes. The key dropped back into its box with a metallic clang. "The sun refuses," hissed the voice, no longer welcoming but cold with anger. As the father refused, the ground beneath Eli's feet trembled. Dust and small stones rained from the tunnel ceiling. The oil lamp flame wavered dangerously. "Run," came another voice, different, younger, emanating from the puppet itself. "Run now!" Eli didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted back through the tunnel, the puppet clutched tightly in one hand, the sputtering lamp in the other. Behind him, the rumbling grew louder, as if something massive stirred in the mountain's depths. He burst through the steel door, slamming it shut with his shoulder. The vibrations stopped instantly, cut off as if by a switch. Silence descended, broken only by his ragged breathing. Eli slid the padlock back into place with trembling hands. Whatever waited on the other side of that door, his father had been right to seal it away. In the relative safety of the root cellar, he examined the wooden puppet more carefully. Its uncanny animation had ceased, leaving it once again an exquisite but inanimate carving. Yet something had changed. The tear on its cheek had dried to a dark stain, and its posture seemed different, arms raised as if pointing. Eli followed the puppet's gesture. On the rough stone wall beside the door, previously hidden in shadow, was a series of petroglyphs, ancient carvings etched deep into the rock. They depicted human figures holding hands in a circle around a central shaft of light. Above them, star patterns matched those on the Starfinder and pocket watch. Below these images, more recent markings had been scratched into the stone, a crude map showing tunnels branching beneath the mountain. One tunnel was marked with his father's initials, JT, alongside a date from 3 months ago, just days before the landslide. Beside it, an ominous notation: "They've broken through to the chamber." God help us all. The sound of vehicles outside startled Eli from his examination. He doused the lamp and crept upstairs, carefully replacing the trapdoor and rug. Through the kitchen window, he glimpsed headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. 2 trucks had pulled up in front of the cabin. Men spilled from the vehicles, carrying flashlights and what looked like mining equipment. Among them, Eli recognized Sheriff Bryce's tall figure and the stocky form of Mayor Hammond. They approached the cabin with purposeful strides. Eli grabbed his backpack, stuffing in his father's journal. He added the wooden puppet, handling it carefully, despite its apparent return to inanimation. The front door wasn't an option. He'd be seen immediately. The back window in his bedroom would have to do. As he turned to flee, his foot struck something protruding from beneath the living room rug, a corner of wood that hadn't been exposed before. The vibrations from the tunnel must have shifted the floorboards. Despite the approaching danger, curiosity compelled him to pull back the rug. What he found sent ice through his veins. A wooden chest handle, attached to what appeared to be a small coffin built into the floor itself. Engraved on its surface was a single word: Guardian. No time to investigate further. The men were at the front door, their shadows visible through the curtains. Eli raced to his bedroom, forcing open the stuck window as quietly as possible. He wriggled through the narrow opening, just as the cabin door crashed open. "Search everything," came Sheriff Bryce's voice. "The journal has to be here somewhere. And the key," added Mayor Hammond. "If Turner found the key, we're all in danger." Eli dropped to the ground outside, pressing himself against the cabin wall. Evening shadows concealed him as he edged away from the window. The forest waited 30 yards away. If he could reach it unseen, he might escape. Something small and hard pressed against his foot. A stone with unusual markings. It hadn't been there earlier. Eli scooped it up instinctively as he crept toward the tree line. The stone was smooth obsidian, polished to a mirror finish on one side. The other side bore an etched symbol, a simplified eye within a triangle. As his fingers closed around it, warmth spread up his arm, and for an instant the forest before him transformed. Instead of trees, Eli saw tunnels, a vast network spreading beneath the mountain like roots. Blue light pulsed through these passages, converging at a central chamber far below. And moving through the tunnels were small figures, child-sized, their forms translucent and glowing. The vision vanished as quickly as it had come. Eli staggered, nearly falling. The obsidian eye stone grew cool again in his palm. A shout from the cabin snapped him back to immediate danger. The cellar door's been opened. Someone's been here. Eli ran, the enchanted stone clutched tightly in his hand. As he plunged into the forest, one certainty drove him forward. He needed to find the other entrances to the mine, the tunnels where living children, not just wooden echoes, might still be trapped, and if his father was among them, Eli would bring him home. Deeper into the forest Eli ran, guided only by instinct and the faint glow of a rising moon. Behind him, flashlight beams swept the cabin clearing. Men's voices called to each other, urgent and angry. He was just here, the Turner boy.
Spread out.
He couldn't have gotten far. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs as he ducked behind a massive pine trunk. The obsidian eye stone pulsed warmly in his palm, almost like a heartbeat. When he glanced down at it, the polished surface no longer reflected moonlight, but glowed with an inner blue luminescence. Following some inexplicable urge, Eli pressed the stone to his forehead. Instantly his vision shifted. The forest around him faded, replaced by the ghostly outlines of tunnels beneath the ground. One passage glowed brighter than the others, leading northwest from his position, an escape route. He pulled the stone away, returning to normal sight, then oriented himself and began moving northwest. The stone had shown him a tunnel, but how would he access it? The answer came as he crested a small rise and found himself facing a sheer rock face veined with quartz. In daylight, he would have dismissed it as an ordinary cliff. But in the blue-tinged moonlight, he noticed how certain quartz veins formed a pattern similar to the star map on the pocket watch and Starfinder. And at the base of the cliff, partially hidden by ferns, was a narrow crevice just wide enough for a child to squeeze through. Eli hesitated only briefly before dropping to his hands and knees. The opening was dark and uninviting, but the shouts behind him were growing closer. He took a deep breath and crawled inside. The passage descended steeply, forcing him to brace against both walls to control his descent. After about 20 feet, it widened enough for him to stand, though he had to stoop. The air grew noticeably warmer, carrying that same mineral scent he'd detected in the root cellar. Without a light source, Eli was effectively blind. He fumbled in his backpack until his fingers closed around the wooden puppet. On impulse, he withdrew it and gasped as it began to glow with soft blue light, illuminating the tunnel ahead. The passage continued downward, periodically marked with the same star-pattern symbols he'd seen before. Eli followed them like breadcrumbs, one hand trailing along the rough stone wall for balance. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, the narrow passage opened into a broader tunnel with a flat floor and higher ceiling. Here, the blue glow intensified, emanating from crystal formations embedded in the walls. Unlike the jagged natural crystals he'd seen in science books, these were perfectly smooth, almost like glass. Pulsing with rhythmic light, Eli moved cautiously. The glowing puppet held before him like a lantern. The main tunnel branched repeatedly, forming a confusing maze. But each time he hesitated at a junction, the puppet's glow would intensify toward one path. As if guiding him, a sound stopped him in his tracks, distant but unmistakable. Children's voices singing a familiar melody. The mountain folk song his father had taught him, about stars falling into the deep valleys. Following the song, Eli navigated several more turns until the tunnel opened into a spacious cavern. The ceiling soared upward, studded with blue crystals that mimicked a starry night sky. A small underground stream cut across the far side, its water glowing with the same ethereal blue. Light, but what froze? Eli in place where the three children gathered. Around a crystal formation, in the center of the cavern, they appeared to be approximately his own age, though it was difficult to tell. Their skin was pale almost to translucence, with faint blue veins visible beneath. Their eyes, when they turned toward him, reflected the crystal light like mirrors. Each child wore tattered clothing that might once have been normal, jeans, t-shirts, sneakers, but were now coated with a fine crystal dust that sparkled when they moved. The tallest, a girl with long white blonde hair, stepped forward. "You came," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "The Guardian said you would." Eli clutched the puppet tighter. Who are you?" The girl tilted her head, studying him with those reflective eyes. "You know me, Eli Turner. Or you know my name, at least." With a jolt, Eli realized he was looking at Lucy Hammond, the mayor's daughter who had disappeared 2 years ago. The wooden puppet in his hand was her exact likeness, down to the shape of her eyes and the small dimple in her right cheek. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered. Lucy's laugh was like wind chimes. "Not dead, changed. We all are." She gestured to the other children, a boy who might have been 12 and a younger girl, perhaps 5 or 6. "Tommy Davis," Lucy said, pointing to the boy. "Missing since last summer. And little Mia Wilson, gone 3 months now. Just like others before us, going back generations." Eli struggled to process what he was seeing. These were the missing children from his father's journal, not dead, but somehow surviving in the tunnels beneath the mountain. Their appearance was altered, their manners strange, but they were undeniably alive. "My father," Eli managed. "James Turner." "Have you seen him?" The 3 children exchanged glances. Finally, Lucy spoke again, her voice gentler. "He found us, just before the last awakening. He tried to help us escape, to tell people what was happening beneath the mountain. But the men from town caught him," Tommy added, his voice deeper than expected from his small frame. "They brought him to the deep chamber where the Guardian sleeps. Is he alive?" Eli's voice cracked with desperate hope. Little Mia approached, her movements gliding rather than stepping. From around her neck, she removed a carved wooden fox, a perfect match to the half-finished animal Eli had seen his father whittling the night of the landslide. "He made this for me," she said, placing it in Eli's palm. 3 days ago." 3 days? Eli's mind raced. "That's impossible!" "He disappeared 3 months ago." Lucy shook her head, crystal dust shimmering in her hair. "Time moves differently in the deep places. What feels like months above is mere days below. Where is he now?" "Can you take me to him?" The children grew still, their expressions solemn. Tommy finally spoke. "He's with the others, in the crystal prison. The blue light preserves them until what?" Eli demanded. Lucy met his gaze directly. "Until the awakening. When the stars align and the Guardian rises to feed." "The Guardian," Eli repeated, clutching the wooden fox. "What is it?" The children exchanged uneasy glances. Tommy fidgeted with a bracelet on his wrist, a simple cord threaded with blue crystal beads that glowed with the same pulsing rhythm as the larger formations. "It sleeps in the deepest chamber," Lucy explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's been here longer than the mountain itself. The first miners found it by accident in 1937. They thought they'd discovered a new mineral," Tommy added. "Something valuable. They kept digging, following the blue veins deeper. But it wasn't a mineral," Eli guessed. Lucy shook her head. "It was the Guardian's blood, crystallized over centuries of sleep." Little Mia tugged at Eli's sleeve. "It sings to us," she said, her eyes wide. "Beautiful songs about stars and ancient cities beneath the waves. But the songs are lies." Eli tried to make sense of their fragmented explanation. "And my father?" "He found the truth," Lucy said, "in old Blackwood's records. The original mine owner kept detailed journals about what they discovered. When the Guardian first stirred, in 1957, Tommy picked up the narrative. Every 20 years, when certain stars align, the Guardian begins to wake. It needs sustenance. The men from town learned they could appease it with offerings." "Children," Eli whispered, the horror of it settling over him like ice. Lucy nodded grimly. But your father found another way. He discovered something in Blackwood's later journals about a key that could seal the Guardian away permanently. The twisted iron key, Eli said, remembering what he'd seen in the small chamber off the root cellar. You've seen it? Lucy's eyes widened. Did you take it? No, it felt wrong. Relief washed over her features. Good. The key isn't what it appears. It's part of the Guardian itself, a lure. Anyone who takes it becomes connected. Like we are, Tommy said, raising his crystal bracelet. These formed on our wrists after our first night below. They bind us to this place, to the blue light. Your father refused to take the key too, Lucy continued. That's why they brought him to the crystal prison. The mayor and sheriff thought he would break eventually, agree to help them control the Guardian. But he didn't, Mia said proudly. Can you take me to him? Eli pleaded. I need to see him. The children fell silent again, communicating through glances in a way that suggested they'd developed their own silent language during their time underground. It's dangerous, Lucy finally said. The men from town come down regularly to check the crystals and prepare for the awakening, and the Guardian stirs, Tommy added. Its dreams reach out, searching. If it finds you, I don't care, Eli said firmly. He's my father. Lucy studied him with her reflective eyes. Then she reached for the bracelet around Tommy's wrist, removing one small crystal bead. It glowed brilliantly between her fingers. Take this, she said, placing it in Eli's palm beside the wooden fox. It will hide you from the Guardian's dreams, for a little while at least. The crystal bead was warm, vibrating slightly against his skin. It wasn't solid as he'd expected, but partially liquid, a drop of blue luminescence encased in a transparent shell. What is it? He asked. We call it tearstone, Lucy explained. The liquid inside is the Guardian's essence. Wearing it marks you as already claimed, so it won't search for you. Eli hesitated only briefly before slipping the tearstone bead into his pocket. How do we get to the crystal prison? Follow the water, Tommy said, pointing toward the glowing stream. All paths in the mountain lead eventually to the heart. That's where they keep the prisoners. Misa approached with something clutched in her small hand. Take this too, she said, offering him what appeared to be a simple piece of chalk. But when Eli accepted it, he realized it was actually compressed crystal dust, the same substance that coated the children's clothes. Mark your path, she instructed. The tunnels shift sometimes. The chalk will glow and show you the way back. Eli tucked the chalk into his pocket alongside the tearstone. Will you come with me? The children shook their heads in unison. We can't go near the heart, Lucy explained. The pull is too strong for us. We'd be absorbed, but we'll guide you as far as the junction, Tommy offered. From there, you'll hear the singing. Just follow it to the heart. As they prepared to leave, Eli noticed a small alcove carved into the cavern wall. Inside sat dozens of carved wooden figures, animals, people, abstract shapes, all crafted with the same precise skill as the fox in his hand. Did my father make all these? He asked. Lucy nodded. Whenever they bring him up from the crystal prison, he carves. Says it helps him remember who he is. The blue light, it changes your memories after a while. He makes one for each of us, Mia added, so we don't forget our names. Eli approached the collection, gently touching a carved eagle with outstretched wings. As his fingers contacted the wood, a jolt of recognition passed through him, not just his father's craftsmanship, but something of James Turner himself. Preserved in the grain of the wood, he put something of himself into each carving, Lucy said, observing Eli's reaction. A memory, a thought, a way to keep his soul intact, despite the crystal's influence. Eli selected the eagle, feeling an immediate connection. Warmth spread through his palm as he held it, and for an instant he caught a fleeting impression, his father's voice, saying his name with fierce love and determination. This one's for me, Eli whispered, tears pricking his eyes. He knew you'd come, Tommy said simply. With the eagle tucked safely into his pocket alongside the tearstone and chalk, Eli turned toward the glowing stream. The three pale children formed a solemn procession before him, their feet making no sound on the cavern floor. "The heart awaits," Lucy said, her voice echoing strangely in the crystal-studded chamber. "And with it, the truth about the Guardian and why your father was chosen to find the real key." The tunnels deepened as Eli and the three children followed the luminous stream. The passageways grew wider, their walls smoother, as if worn by countless years of movement. Blue light pulsed through crystal veins embedded in the stone, creating a rippling effect like underwater sunlight. Lucy led the way, her pale form almost translucent in the crystal glow. Tommy walked beside Eli, occasionally offering warnings about unstable sections of floor or low-hanging formations. Little Mia trailed behind, humming a melody that seemed to resonate with the crystals themselves. "We're approaching the junction," Lucy announced, as they reached a massive cavern where 5 tunnels converged. The glowing stream divided here, flowing into separate passages. The ceiling soared upward, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of the blue light. "This is as far as we can go," Tommy said, stopping at the cavern's edge. "The heart pulls too strongly beyond this point." Eli nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Which tunnel?" "Listen," Mia whispered, her small face solemn. Eli closed his eyes, focusing his senses. At first, he heard only the gentle burbling of the stream and his own heartbeat. Then faintly came a sound unlike anything he'd experienced before, a harmonic convergence of tones, almost like singing, but without words or breath. It emanated from the second tunnel from the left. "I hear it," he said, opening his eyes. "That's the heart calling," Lucy explained. "Follow the music, but don't get lost in it. Some sounds are traps." "How will I know which is which?" Tommy reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Eli's hand. "It belonged to your father." Eli unwrapped the bundle to find a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, one lens cracked, the frames bent but still recognizable as his father's reading spectacles. The sight of them made his throat tighten with emotion. "He left them with us for safekeeping," Lucy explained. "Said you might need them." "But my vision is fine," Eli said, confused. "They're not for normal seeing," Tommy replied cryptically. Curious, Eli slipped the glasses onto his face. Immediately, the world transformed. The blue crystal light receded, replaced by true colors he hadn't realized were missing. More importantly, he could now see faint lines of energy connecting the crystals, some blue as before, but others red, yellow, green, and forming a complex web throughout the cavern. "The red paths lead to traps," Lucy said, watching his reaction. "Green is safe passage. Yellow marks where the town men patrol." Eli marveled at the revelation. Without the glasses, all the crystal light had appeared identical. Now he could see distinct patterns, intentions, directions. "The Guardian tries to lure trespassers down certain paths," Tommy explained. "Your father discovered how to see through the illusions. These will lead you to him," Lucy added, "and help you avoid the Watchers." "Watchers?" The children exchanged uneasy glances. "Not all who enter the mountain leave or change." "Like we have," Lucy said carefully. "Some become something else. Extensions of the Guardian's will. They patrol the tunnels near the heart," Tommy added. "They look almost human, but they're not. Not anymore." Eli swallowed hard. "How will I know them?" "Through the glasses, their eyes reflect red," Mia said. "Don't let them see you." With his father's glasses, Eli could now discern a clear green path leading into the second tunnel. He tucked the crystal chalk and tearstone bead into his pocket, ensuring they were secure. "When you find your father," Lucy said, "you'll need to break his crystal binding. It won't be easy. The Guardian's hold is strong." "How?" "You'll know," Tommy said with unexpected certainty. "The mountain called you here for a reason, Eli Turner." Little Mia approached, raising her hand as if to touch Eli's face, but stopping just short. "Be careful of the blue songs," she whispered. "They sound beautiful, but they're full of hunger." The three children stepped back in unison, their forms seeming to fade slightly as they retreated into the safety of the tunnel they'd traversed together. "We'll wait for your return," Lucy promised. "But if you're not back by moonrise—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Eli understood the implicit warning. Time was limited, both by the approaching awakening and by the searchers who would eventually think to look for him underground. With a final nod to his strange guides, Eli stepped into the tunnel that would lead him to the heart. His father's glasses transformed the passage into a clear road map, green energy lines flowing along safe paths, red pulsing from dangerous offshoots, yellow highlighting areas to avoid. The singing grew louder as he progressed deeper, the harmonics shifting into something more complex and beautiful. Even knowing it might be dangerous, Eli found himself drawn forward by the melody, his steps quickening unconsciously. Twice, he caught himself veering toward red-lit side passages, the music particularly compelling in those directions. Each time, he forced himself back to the green path, understanding now how easy it would be for an unprotected explorer to become hopelessly lost. After what might have been 20 minutes of careful progress, the tunnel widened into an antechamber. Here, the crystal growths formed elaborate columns that rose from floor to ceiling. And upon these columns, Eli saw his first watcher. The figure might once have been human. It stood unnaturally still, its body partially encased in crystal that had grown into and through its flesh. Its eyes, as Mia had warned, reflected blood red through the special glasses, vacant yet somehow alert, scanning the chamber with mechanical precision. Eli pressed himself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. The watcher didn't appear to notice him, its gaze passing over his position without pause. Perhaps the tearstone bead was working, marking him as already claimed. When the watcher's attention turned elsewhere, Eli crept forward, following the green energy path around the chamber's perimeter. Beyond, he could see the glow of what must be the heart itself, a pulsating light far more intense than anything he'd encountered thus far. As he reached the chamber's exit, a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, half hidden behind a crystal column, stood another watcher. But this one was different, smaller, its crystallization less advanced. With a jolt of recognition that stole his breath, Eli realized he was looking at Billy Farnsworth, the boy who'd lost his pocket knife last summer and then disappeared during a family camping trip. His parents had moved away shortly after, broken by the loss. Billy's eyes reflected red through the glasses, but as Eli watched, the color flickered momentarily to normal brown. Something of the original boy remained, fighting against the Guardian's control. The sight strengthened Eli's resolve. These weren't just missing children, they were prisoners, their very essence being slowly consumed. And among them, somewhere in the heart chamber ahead, was his father, steeling himself against whatever horrors might await. Eli slipped past the watching figures and into the blinding radiance of the heart. The heart chamber took Eli's breath away. A vast, cathedral-like space stretched before him, its ceiling lost in shadows above. Massive crystal columns rose like ancient trees, their blue luminescence pulsating in hypnotic rhythm. The air itself seemed charged with energy, vibrating against his skin. At the chamber's center stood a pool of liquid crystal, its surface rippling though no wind stirred it. The singing emanated from this pool, harmonics rising and falling in complex patterns that seemed almost like language. But what drew Eli's attention were the figures suspended in crystal casings around the pool's perimeter. People, at least 24, frozen in transparent cocoons. Men and women of various ages, their expressions peaceful as if sleeping. Among them, half hidden behind a larger formation, was a familiar face. "Pa," Eli whispered, his voice catching. James Turner hung suspended within his crystal prison, eyes closed, arms at his sides. Unlike the others, a faint golden glow surrounded him, as if he were somehow resisting the blue energy that consumed the rest. Through his father's glasses, Eli could see that red energy tendrils connected most captives directly to the central pool. But the lines reaching toward James were different. thinner, strained, struggling to maintain their hold. Eli crept forward, careful to follow the green path shown by the glasses. The singing intensified as he neared the pool, becoming almost painfully beautiful, a siren call promising warmth, belonging, transcendence. He clutched the wooden eagle in his pocket, focusing on the brief memory of his father's voice to anchor himself against the pull. When he reached James's crystal cocoon, Eli placed his hand on its smooth surface. It thrummed beneath his touch, warm and almost alive. Through the transparent material, he could see his father's chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Pa!" he called, louder now. "It's me." "It's Eli." James's eyelids flickered but didn't open. The golden light surrounding him pulsed briefly brighter. Eli remembered Lucy's words. "You'll need to break his crystal binding." But how? The material appeared solid as glass, yet somehow fluid, with no obvious weak points. The carved eagle in his pocket suddenly warmed. Eli withdrew it, examining it more carefully. Unlike the other carvings, this one had a sharp, pointed beak, almost like a tool rather than just a figurine. Understanding dawned. Eli positioned the eagle's beak against the crystal surface and pressed. Instead of resistance, the beak slipped into the material as if it were designed precisely for this purpose. He twisted the carving like a key, and a crack appeared, spreading rapidly across the crystal cocoon. The singing from the pool changed tone, becoming discordant, angry. The blue light pulsed frantically. Something had noticed his interference. The crystal surrounding James began to dissolve, dripping away like melting ice. As the last of it receded, his father slumped forward. Eli caught him, struggling under the weight of the full-grown man. James Turner's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his son's face. "Eli," he whispered hoarsely. "How?" "I followed your clues," Eli said, tears threatening. "The box under the stairs, the Starfinder, everything." Recognition dawned in James's eyes. He straightened, some strength returning to his limbs. "We need to leave, now, before I arrive." Interrupted a new voice. Eli spun around. Sheriff Bryce stood at the chamber entrance, flanked by two watchers. Behind them came Mayor Hammond, his face grim in the blue light. "I'm impressed, boy," the sheriff said, stepping forward. "You've accomplished what teams of adults couldn't, finding your way to the heart without being claimed by the Guardian." James pulled Eli protectively behind him, despite his weakened state. "Stay away from my son, Bryce," the sheriff smiled coldly. "Always the protective father. But did you tell him the whole truth, James? About your family's real connection to this place?" Mayor Hammond moved closer to the crystal pool, running his hand almost lovingly across its surface. "The Turners have always been special to the Guardian. Your grandfather was the first to hear its voice, wasn't he, James? Back in 57, during the First Awakening." Eli looked up at his father in confusion. James's jaw tightened. "My grandfather resisted, just as I have, and paid the price," Sheriff Bryce noted. "Just as you have. But your son might be smarter." He turned his attention to Eli. "The Guardian offers gifts to those who serve willingly. The blue crystal can heal any disease, extend life, grant knowledge beyond human understanding." "It takes children," Eli retorted. "It transforms them," corrected Mayor Hammond. "Elevates them. Like my Lucy." His voice softened on his daughter's name. "I see her sometimes, in the tunnels. More beautiful than before. More perfect. She's trapped," Eli said. "They all are," the mayor's face hardened. "They're evolving, becoming something greater than human." "As we all could." James's hand tightened on Eli's shoulder. "The Guardian doesn't elevate anything, it feeds. The transformations are just different methods of consumption, some quick, some slow, all eventual." From his pocket, James withdrew a small object that caught the blue light, a silver badge, tarnished and bent. "I found this in one of the deeper chambers. It belonged to Edward Blackwood's partner when they first discovered the Guardian in 37. The only piece of him ever recovered." Sheriff Bryce's expression darkened. "Put that away," but James held the badge higher. "The Guardian hasn't been sleeping all these centuries. It's been feeding, slowly, patiently. The 20-year cycle isn't about stars aligning. It's about hunger building. to the point where it needs a larger feast. Eli stared at the badge, a simple silver star with Deputy Marshal engraved across its center and a name. Beneath, G. Turner, my great-grandfather, James explained quietly. Edward Blackwood's partner and friend. When he disappeared, Blackwood covered up the truth, started the mine operation as a front to study the entity they'd found. And to feed it, when necessary, Sheriff Bryce reached for his holstered gun. That's enough history. Step away from the boy, James. The awakening is almost upon us, Mayor Hammond added. The Guardian has chosen your son as its vessel this cycle. Fighting this will only cause more pain. Vessel, Eli whispered, fear crawling up his spine. James's eyes blazed with sudden fury. You promised me it would be you this time, Hammond. That's why I agreed to stay, to ensure you kept your word. The mayor smiled thinly. Plans change. The Guardian prefers youth, innocence. He gestured to the watchers. Take the boy. Secure the father again. As the crystallized figures moved forward, Eli clutched the deputy marshal's badge that his father had pressed into his hand. The metal burned suddenly hot against his palm, and for an instant he felt a connection, not just to his father, but to generations of Turners who had faced this entity before him. The deputy marshal's badge pulsed warmly in Eli's palm, its silver surface beginning to glow with the same golden light that had surrounded his father in the crystal prison. The approaching watchers hesitated, their red eyes flickering uncertainly. What's happening? Sheriff Bryce demanded, his hand tightening on his gun. James Turner straightened, strength visibly flowing back into his limbs. The Guardian isn't the only power in this mountain, he said, his voice steady. My family has been its warden for generations, not its servants. Mayor Hammond backed toward the crystal pool. The badge, he hissed to the sheriff. Take it from the boy! Bryce drew his weapon, but before he could aim, James lunged forward with unexpected speed. He tackled the sheriff, sending them both crashing to the ground. The gun skittered across the stone floor. Run, Eli! James shouted as he grappled with the larger man. Eli hesitated only a moment before darting toward a side tunnel. The watchers moved to intercept him, their movements jerky but swift. Behind him, he heard Mayor Hammond shouting orders, his father's grunt of pain, the sounds of struggle. The badge in his hand grew brighter, illuminating the tunnel ahead with golden light. Through his father's glasses, Eli could see the green path winding away from the heart chamber. He sprinted along it, the watcher's shuffling steps close behind. The tunnel twisted and branched. Without the glasses, Eli would have been hopelessly lost within minutes. He marked his path with the crystal chalk as he ran, the glowing streaks creating a trail he hoped his father could follow. A sound like breaking glass echoed through the tunnels, followed by an inhuman shriek that made the very air vibrate. The crystal veins in the walls pulsed frantically, their blue light intensifying. Whatever had happened in the heart chamber, the Guardian was fully awake now, and angry. Eli rounded a corner and collided with a small figure. He tumbled backward, nearly dropping the badge. Looking up, he found himself face to face with Lucy Hammond, her pale features tense with urgency. This way, she whispered, pulling him toward a narrow crevice in the wall he hadn't noticed. The watchers can't fit through here. Eli squeezed into the opening after her, the rough stone scraping his shoulders. Behind them, heavy footsteps and labored breathing announced the watchers' approach. The crevice opened into a vertical shaft with crude handholds carved into the rock. Lucy began to climb without hesitation, her movements unnaturally fluid. Eli followed, clutching the badge between his teeth to keep both hands free. The Guardian is fully awake, Lucy said as they climbed. Ta-dee-der-ter-but-tat-tat-tat. Your father did something to its containment pool. Is he, Eli began. Alive last I saw. Fighting. The sheriff is down. My father, her voice caught slightly. My father is trying to complete the ritual. They emerged in a small chamber Eli hadn't seen before. Tommy and Mia waited there, along with 3 other transformed children. Between them sat an object that made Eli's breath catch, a lantern crafted of silver and crystal, its design similar to old mining lamps, but far more intricate. Inside, a blue flame burned without fuel, casting shifting patterns across the chamber walls. "The Guardian's heart," Lucy explained, gesturing to the lantern. "Your father found it hidden in Blackwood's old office and brought it here for safekeeping." Tommy approached, carrying a small leather satchel. "These belong to your father," he said, offering it to Eli. "He said if anything happened, we should give them to you and help you reach the surface." Inside the satchel, Eli found his father's journal, several folded papers, and a hand-drawn map marking all the tunnel entrances and exits throughout the mountain. Most importantly, it contained a small iron key. "This opens the western exit," Lucy explained, pointing to a spot on the map. "It's the farthest from the heart, which means it's the safest right now." "I can't leave without my father," Eli protested. The children exchanged glances. "He told us you'd say that," Tommy said with the ghost of a smile. "That's why he gave us this." From behind a crystal formation, Mia retrieved a carved wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Its surface was covered with the same celestial patterns as the Starfinder and pocket watch. She presented it to Eli with solemn ceremony. "He said it contains what's needed to end this," Lucy explained, "and that if he couldn't escape, you needed to take it to Marshal Gardner in Helena." The box was surprisingly heavy. Through the glasses, Eli could see it contained not blue or red energy, but pure, steady green, safe, protective, purposeful. A violent tremor shook the chamber, dislodging dust and small stones from the ceiling. The blue flame in the lantern flickered wildly. "It's starting," Lucy whispered, fear evident in her voice. "The awakening! We need to move," Tommy urged. "The western tunnel. Now!" Eli clutched the wooden box to his chest, conflict raging within him. Leave his father behind. After coming so far, another tremor, stronger this time. The silver badge in his hand pulsed in time with the shaking, as if responding to the mountain's distress. "Your father knew what he was doing," Lucy said gently. "The box is more important than any of us now." With the deputy marshal's badge in one hand and his father's wooden box in the other, Eli made his decision. He would trust his father's plan, get the box to Helena, find this Marshal Gardner, end the Guardian's hold once and for all. The transformed children led him through a maze of narrow passages, avoiding the main tunnels where watchers now swarmed in frantic patterns. The tremors continued, growing stronger with each occurrence. Small crystals detached from the walls, shattering on the ground like glass raindrops. "What happens during the awakening?" Eli asked as they hurried along. Lucy's expression darkened. "The Guardian takes its vessel and rises. It feeds on the energy of the mountain, the town, everything within its reach. Then it sleeps again, stronger than before. And the vessel." Her silence was answer enough. They reached a steep upward passage where cool air flowed down from above, the first fresh air Eli had felt in what seemed like days. The iron key fit perfectly into an ancient lock set into a stone door. With a grinding sound, the door swung open, revealing starlit sky above. "This is where we must stay behind," Lucy said, stopping at the threshold. She removed a thin silver chain from around her neck. On it hung a small crystal pendant, not blue like the Guardian's essence, but clear as water with a spark of golden light suspended in its center. "Your father made this for me," she said, placing it in Eli's hand. "He called it Remembered Light, said it might help me find my way back someday." The pendant was warm, alive with that same golden energy Eli had seen surrounding his father. Through the glasses, he could see it was slowly neutralizing the blue energy in Lucy's system, not enough to free her completely, but offering a spark of hope. "I'll come back for all of you," Eli promised. "Once I find Marshal Gardner. We'll try to help your father," Tommy added. "The Guardian can't fully control us." "Not yet." Little Mia approached, her luminescent eyes solemn. "The mountain remembers the Turners," she said cryptically. "It will help you if you listen." With one last look at the transformed children, Eli stepped through the doorway and into the night. Behind him, The stone door swung shut with finality, the lock clicking into place. He stood on an unfamiliar slope, the town of Pinecrest visible as distant lights in the valley below. Above, stars scattered across the black sky like the crystals beneath the mountain, a reflection above of what lurked below. Clutching his father's wooden box and the marshal's badge, Eli began the long descent, guided by starlight and the memory of his father's voice. Some battles pass from father to son. Trust the light that remembers. Dawn broke over the eastern ridge as Eli reached the outskirts of Pinecrest. The town slumbered peacefully, unaware of the ancient horror stirring beneath the mountain above. Streets lay empty in the early light, windows dark, chimneys cold. Eli moved cautiously, keeping to shadows and backyards. He had no way of knowing how far the conspiracy reached, beyond Sheriff Bryce and Mayor Hammond. Who else in town might be looking for him? His grandfather's house stood at the far end of Maple Street, its familiar weathered porch a beacon of safety. But Eli hesitated. His mother would be frantic with worry by now, and his grandfather would demand explanations. Could he risk involving them? The decision was made for him as a police cruiser, not the sheriff's, but a vehicle he didn't recognize, rolled slowly down the street. Eli ducked behind a hedge, clutching his father's wooden box tighter. The cruiser stopped directly in front of his grandfather's house. A tall woman in a tan uniform stepped out, adjusting a wide-brimmed hat as she approached the door. Not local law enforcement. State police, or possibly... Eli's heart leapt. Marshal Gardner? The very person his father had instructed him to find? The woman knocked firmly. Moments later, the door opened to reveal Sarah Turner, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. Words were exchanged, though Eli was too far away to hear them. His mother's expression shifted from tension to confusion, then to something like cautious hope. Eli desperately wanted to run to her, to feel her arms around him, assuring him everything would be all right. But his father's warning echoed in his memory. Trust no one until the box was safely delivered. He circled around, making his way to the back of his grandfather's property. The small tool shed there had a loose board his father had shown him years ago, a hiding place for birthday presents and Christmas surprises. Now it would serve a more urgent purpose. Slipping inside, Eli found a dusty tarp and wrapped his father's box carefully. He tucked it into the shadowy space behind the loose board, ensuring it was completely hidden. The marshal's badge and the remembered light pendant he kept with him, along with his father's glasses. From the shed window, he could see into the kitchen. His mother sat at the table with the uniformed woman who was now taking notes. His grandfather paced nearby, gesticulating emphatically. On the table between them lay a folder with official-looking documents. Eli took a deep breath and stepped out of the shed. This was a gamble, but one he had to take. If this was truly Marshal Gardner, she was his father's only hope. If not, well, he still had the badge and the pendant as insurance. He approached the back door cautiously. Through the screen, he could hear fragments of conversation, multiple reports of children gone missing near that mountain over decades. Sheriff Bryce claimed jurisdiction, refused assistance, suspicious mining operations without permits. His mother spotted him first, her eyes widening in shock. "Eli!" she cried, knocking over her chair as she rushed to the door. The reunion was a blur of tears and fierce hugs, his mother's hands checking him for injuries, her voice alternating between relief and scolding. His grandfather's weathered face creased with emotion as he patted Eli's shoulder repeatedly, as if assuring himself the boy was real. When the initial storm of emotion subsided, Eli found himself facing the uniformed woman. She knelt to his level, her expression kind but professional. "Hello, Eli. I'm Deputy Marshal Helen Gardner. I've been looking for you and for your father." A weight lifted from Eli's shoulders. This was the right person after all. But caution kept him silent about the box for now. "My pa's in trouble," he said simply. "Under the mountain," Deputy Marshal Gardner nodded. "I know. Your father contacted my office 3 months ago with some concerning information. When he disappeared and I couldn't reach him, I began investigating. Then I received this in the mail yesterday. She placed an object on the kitchen table, a small ceramic figurine of a marshal's badge, meticulously detailed down to the engraved lettering. On the back, in tiny, precise lettering, was written, "Gardner, time's up, JT." Eli recognized his father's handiwork immediately. Another carving, another message. "Your father was very thorough," Gardner continued. "He sent documentation about illegal mining operations, environmental violations, evidence of corruption involving local officials. But most concerning were his notes about the missing children." Sarah's hand tightened on Eli's shoulder. "What missing children?" "7 local children disappeared over the past 2 years, Gardner explained. Sheriff Bryce reported only 3 of them, classifying the others as runaways or family relocations. Your husband connected them all to something beneath the mountain." Eli's grandfather sank heavily into a chair. "Just like 57, he murmured. "And 77 and 97. He looked up at their surprised faces. "James's father, my son, he investigated too back when he was alive. The mountain takes children. Always has." "Not the mountain," Eli said quietly. "The Guardian." All eyes turned to him. In that moment, Eli made his decision. These people, his family, this marshal his father had trusted, they needed to know everything. "I found Pa," he said. "He's alive but trapped. And there's something else trapped down there too, something ancient and hungry. It's waking up. And when it does, it won't just be the children in danger." Deputy Marshal Gardner's expression remained calm, though her eyes sharpened with interest. From her jacket pocket, she withdrew a small notebook and opened it, revealing pages filled with handwritten notes and diagrams. The top page showed a drawing identical to the celestial pattern on the Starfinder and pocket watch. "Your father mentioned something he called the Guardian," she said. "I've been researching similar phenomena across the country. Eli, I need you to tell me everything you saw beneath the mountain." "I can do better than that," Eli replied, sudden confidence filling him. "I can show you." 3 months later, Eli stood on the ridge overlooking the Turner property, watching workers move across the landscape. Yellow excavation equipment dotted the hillside, where federal agents had spent weeks extracting evidence and securing the extensive tunnel network. The blue glow that had once emanated from certain crevices was gone now, the crystals inert and lifeless. In his hand, he held a small silver bell his father had given him that morning, a simple thing with delicate engravings along its rim showing the phases of the moon. Its clear ring could be heard even over the machinery below. "Ready to head back?" James Turner asked, joining his son at the overlook. Eli nodded, giving the bell a gentle shake. Its pure tone seemed to hang in the air, a counterpoint to the mechanical sounds below. His father looked different now, thinner, with streaks of grey in his dark hair that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were clear and determined as they surveyed the work being done on their land. The weeks in the hospital after his rescue had restored his physical strength, though some scars would never fade. They descended the path toward the partially rebuilt cabin. Its original structure had been deemed unsafe after the final confrontation beneath the mountain, what Deputy Marshal Gardner now officially termed the containment operation. The new foundation was larger, built according to modern safety standards, with none of the hidden chambers or secret entrances of the original. As they approached, Sarah emerged onto the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. She waved, and Eli ran ahead to meet her, the silver bell chiming with each step. Marshal Gardner called, she told them as they climbed the porch steps. "They've processed the last of the evidence from the mine. Once the final seals are in place next week, the case will officially close." James nodded, his expression solemn. "And the children?" "6 recovered so far," Sarah said. "Lucy Hammond responded well to the treatment." "She's speaking again. The doctors say she may be able to go home by Christmas. Home, but not to Pinecrest." After Mayor Hammond's arrest and Sheriff Bryce's death in the tunnels, the small town had become a media spectacle. Many families had relocated, unable to face the truth about what had happened beneath their mountain for generations. Inside the cabin, Deputy Marshal Gardner's containment diagrams still covered one wall. detailed maps of the tunnel system and the specialized barriers now installed at key junctures. The wooden box from James's hiding place sat open on the table, its contents, ancient documents, crystal samples, and the twisted iron key now catalogued and secured in government facilities. But one item remained with the Turners, the silver bell that had been hidden in a secret compartment in the box's base. According to James, it had been passed down through generations of Turners since 1937, when his great-grandfather first encountered the Guardian. The frequency disrupts its influence, James had explained when he'd given it to Eli that morning. Our family's defense when all else fails. Now Eli placed the bell carefully on the mantelpiece of their new fireplace. Its silver surface caught the light, the moon phase engravings seeming to shift and change as he moved. Will it ever come back? He asked, the question that had haunted him despite all the assurances from experts and officials. James considered his answer carefully. The Guardian has existed for thousands of years, taking different forms in different places. What we contained was just one manifestation. There will be others, and when there are, we'll be ready, Sarah added firmly, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. That evening, a sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The Turner family sat on their porch steps. The construction crews had departed, leaving behind blessed silence. In the distance, the mountain stood as it always had, ancient and inscrutable. I dreamed about them last night, Eli said quietly. The children who weren't found. They were following a golden path up through the mountain toward the stars. James nodded, unsurprised. The connection his son had formed with those lost in the tunnels hadn't faded with the Guardian's containment. The doctors called it a form of post-traumatic response. Deputy Marshal Gardner, with her broader experience of such phenomena, suggested it might be something more, a sensitivity passed down through the Turner bloodline. Not all who were taken could be brought back, James acknowledged. Some transformations go too deep to reverse, but they're free now in their way. The silver bell chimed softly in the evening breeze, though no one had touched it. James and Sarah exchanged glances, but said nothing. As true darkness fell, James pointed upward to where the first stars were appearing. See that one there? That's Polaris, the North Star. Sailors have used it to find their way home for thousands of years. Eli followed his father's gesture, recognizing the star pattern from the star finder and the pocket watch. The mountain's eye, he whispered. James looked at his son with surprise. That's what my father called it too. From his pocket, Eli withdrew the deputy marshal's badge, its silver surface reflecting starlight. He'd been allowed to keep it as a memento after the investigation concluded. Now he traced its outline with his finger, feeling the connection to the great-grandfather he'd never known, but whose legacy had helped save them all. Do you think they're really gone? Eli asked. Lucy and Tommy and Mia. The doctors said their recovery was incomplete. They're changed, his father replied honestly. But so are we. Sarah put her arms around them both, drawing them close. Above, the stars continued their ancient patterns, unchanged by the human dramas played out beneath them. The silver bell on the mantel chimed again, a clear, pure note that carried across the valley, and somewhere deep in the sealed tunnels, where no human would venture again, a single blue crystal flickered briefly and went dark.